circular and secured with thin linen threads. On the chest of the mummy, directly below the mask, lay two crossed hands made of polished gold plate holding royal insignia. The hands were sewn onto the mummy casing. A scarab beetle made from resin was embedded between them. Beneath this, a ba bird with a human head unfurls his wings. This ba rested in the body at night. He is the immortal and free-roaming part of the human soul. 4 horizontal strips and 1 vertical strip of sheet gold with inlaid text mimic the bindings with which the shroud was fixed to the mummy. After the precious overlays had been lifted free from a wrapped mummy, the bandages could be removed layer by layer, which revealed countless amulets and other jewelry. On the chest there lay several necklaces in the shape of vultures, falcons, and cobras, as well as heavy pendants, one on top of the other. Bracelets encased the forearms in dense rows. This dagger with the elaborate handle is made from iron, which was very unusual at this time. Gilded reliefs on the 4 sides show the canopic gods. These are the 4 sons of Horus and the guardian gods of the internal organs. Another god stands in front of each of these. 2 friezes of cobras with sun discs ward off any danger. The canopic shrine stands on a sled because it was once pulled over the desert sand to the tomb. When Howard Carter opened the shrine, he discovered a chest made of alabaster with 4 wonderfully carved stone heads of the king. These also represent the 4 guardian gods of the internal organs. Inside them were 4 small mummy-shaped coffins. Each of the miniature coffins was made of gold. The outer casing was inlaid with cells of colored glass and precious stones, while the decorations on the inner casing were engraved. In these small coffins were the king's mummified organs, namely, the text you can see on the stone isn't actually very exciting. It's a decree by Egyptian priest, later Christian, a representation that has its ancient roots here.
There was no limit to our amazement and enthusiasm. Time and again, we came across completely unexpected things. For instance, a simple wooden box to which we paid no attention at first. But when we finally opened it, we found 2 small coffins inside, and each coffin contained a very similar gilded inner coffin.
The find of this box and the opening of the coffins led to an unusual and very moving discovery. It tells us the story of a tragedy from the brief family life of Tutankhamun, who, after all, died when he was only 18 years old.
When we opened the first inner coffin, we found the tiny body of a prematurely born child, a girl. This premature infant was wrapped up like a little mummy. On her head, she bore a mask of gilded cartonnage that was much too large for her. In the second inner coffin lay the wrapped and mummified body of a second girl. This child had died at birth or shortly thereafter.
It's highly likely that these 2 little girls are Tutankhamun's daughters. The mummies of the 2 dead children were buried at the tomb alongside their dead father, the pharaoh.
As Tutankhamun left no children when he died, his death signaled the end of the 18th dynasty. Somewhat shaken, I asked myself, what might have happened if Tutankhamun's children had not died? Would Egyptian history have taken a very different course? Would the later Ramessian kings ever have existed?
Along with this, Carter also found a small wooden coffin in human form, which you can also see in the showcase.
It is 75 centimeters, or almost 30 inches long, and coated with a shining layer of black resin. It contained a second
Although the personal participation of Tutankhamun in war is not known, according to the Egyptian ideology of rulers, he is always depicted as a victorious king and commander. That is why his tomb was equipped with all necessary weapons, all beautifully decorated and of the highest quality.
The most important responsibility of the pharaoh was to maintain the connection with the gods. But he also had many other responsibilities. One of these consisted of protecting the country from external and internal enemies and guaranteeing stability. That was why the king was also the commander-in-chief. In the tomb of Tutankhamun, we found a total of 6 war chariots, although they were dismantled. Otherwise, they would not have fit in the tomb.
Among them, they included this magnificent state chariot of the king, richly decorated and overlaid with gold. The frame or chassis of the chariot is made from pieces of bent wood, and the wood of the cockpit is overlaid with gold. A precisely woven mesh of leather thongs makes a kind of suspension out of the floor. On the inside, you can see captured enemy warriors in chains. On both sides of the frieze, the king, this time represented as a sphinx, tramples down a prisoner.
You see here the incomparably valuable insignias of power, the scepters. They empower the king to act in the responsible office of pharaoh and to communicate with the gods. As a result, the king has divine forces in the eyes of his subjects. Of all the scepters, the crook and flail are the most familiar symbols of the pharaoh's power as the highest guardian of humanity. The crook is an ancient symbol of shepherds, which identifies the king as the supreme guardian of mankind. Even today, it is also the emblem of Christian bishops and popes. The flail might once have been a whip to drive cattle, or perhaps a fly whisk. No mortal could ever have touched these insignia. The supernatural energy they contained would have killed any human immediately. Only the pharaoh was able to handle them, for he was the living God on earth.
Yes, and even his walking sticks, with their images of captive enemies, demonstrate the pharaoh's power. You can see them in a showcase next to the throne. He's literally got a grip on his enemies. He can crush them with one hand. In total, almost 130 such objects were found, which led Howard Carter to the remark that the king must have been a collector of walking sticks.
The ceremonial sickle in the showcase probably served the king at harvest rites, which were to ensure Egypt's fertility. And the golden figurine that you see here shows Tutankhamun. It adorned the upper end of a golden rod, which may have been used at the coronation ceremony. An additional version in silver was found that belonged to a silver rod, both to the pharaoh's throne, the golden throne of Tutankhamun. What a magnificent display!
And what a demonstration of power. Fan bearers once stood to the right and left to the king, as you can imagine here, and they waved fresh air to Tutankhamun, cooling in the Egyptian heat, while disagreeable emissaries of hostile nations had to stand in the hot sun.
On some summer days, the temperature could rise well above 40 degrees Celsius, 104 degrees or more Fahrenheit. That was the power of the sun god, mythically seen as emanating from the king, which the emissaries should feel. These fans contained ostrich feathers. In the illustrations on the brackets, we recognize the name of the king and scenes from an ostrich hunt.
I asked myself,
I don't think they would have cooled me down.
300 years ago, Tutankhamun had really sat on this throne during the solemn rites and ceremonies that were a part of being a king. It was the throne of the most powerful
You wake her
ruler in
up.
the world, even if, as in this case, it was occupied by a child or youth. Before this
Let
young
that
king,
baby
the
let
most
that baby
powerful
sleep.
in the land and the rulers of foreign peoples bent their knee.
On the inner side of the backrest, we can see a very interesting representation. It's one of Tutankhamun and his wife, Ankhesenamun.
We were very touched by this little scene. A young couple facing each other lovingly in a beautiful, poetic atmosphere. The king is sitting in a relaxed pose on a throne with cushions, and before him stands the girlish figure of the queen. In one hand, she holds a small ointment bowl, while with the other, she gently anoints his shoulder. It is a simple little domestic scene, but how steeped with life and feeling.
The little footstool in front of the throne also demonstrates the power of the pharaoh. It's a tabaret made of
Reba,
wood and dark blue
what's the number
feathers.
for this one?
The ruler could rest his feet on a scene of captive, fettered Nubians and other continentals who now find themselves literally under the feet of the pharaoh.
Turn around.
What's the number for that one?
Nothing. It's only that you read it.
I don't want to read it.
How do you go in here? It's chess in the old times. So I find.
That's how they play chess. Can you play chess like that?
Not chess.
In the tomb of Tutankhamun, we found many beautiful vessels of alabaster, and we were amazed that after 33 centuries they still contain the dried up remains of oils or other cosmetic substances. They tell us much about people's efforts to look good and to smell good.
Ancient Egypt was a tantalizingly sensual and erotic world that revolved around elegance, beauty, and sex appeal, at least in the highest society at the court of the pharaoh. One aspect of this beauty was the fragrance or scent of a person. For the pharaoh, these scents had a symbolic significance as well. They revealed the presence of the divine. You could literally smell the divinity.
The perfumes were among the highest class of luxuries. Frankincense and myrrh, ointments and oils from lotus blossoms, fragrant essences of pine and cedar wood that were imported from the Levant. People also used precious makeup, principally for the eyes, to try and make them more expressive. Men and women were well turned out in everyday life as well. They dressed and made themselves up with care. Men wore short hair or even shaved their heads, which was seen as
She can get in the
fashion,
pool if she wants, I don't
but
care.
it also had a more practical purpose, namely protection against
Yeah, it's done.
which were fairly expensive. On ceremonial occasions, wigs were worn. The cheaper ones were made of sheep's wool.
No, I don't want to go. I want to stay here.
You can see some particularly beautiful objects from these finds here in the showcase. An enchanting line.
We've now come to the central point of the whole burial, the mummy of the deceased pharaoh. Let's pause for a moment here and look back toward the shrines, because this is exactly the perspective that accords with the religious thinking of the ancient Egyptians. From the inside outward, from the mummy to the outer shrine. And the way of resurrection for the king also runs from the inside outward. The mummy is where the soul of the king resides, and the three coffins symbolize the body of the king, who has metamorphosed into the sun god.
Everything must thus be seen from the perspective of the pharaoh, who lies at the center of the tomb complex. Only then are the deepest mysteries of religion revealed, as they were seen and believed by the ancient Egyptians, and we can understand the mystery of creation.
The deceased king is resurrected in the afterlife as the sun god, just like the sun at the moment of its creation. The fourth and innermost shrine is all about the indissoluble conjunction between creation, death, resurrection, and new creation. For the death of the pharaoh, and of every other person, is always a new beginning as well. On the longer sides of the third shrine, the ram-headed sun god travels in his bark through the underworld of the night. His power has now been used up from his appearance in the morning and throughout the long day. The sun and the god are one. Their energy must be renewed in the underworld, in the hours of darkness. The sides of the second shrine depict this mystery, the mystery of the sun's power. This mythical knowledge was so secret that the priests additionally encrypted the inscriptions so as to protect the secret from the uninitiated. You'll find illustrations here in which figures of gods are irradiated with light, in other words, energy, by small symbolic sun disks. During this process,
On the insides of these sandals were depictions of Asian and African people, the enemies of Egypt. The pharaoh trampled them with his feet as he walked and was thus symbolically preventing them from ever attacking Egypt. His torso with the face of the young king could have served as a kind of dressing mannequin for Tutankhamun. Carter also discovered headrests made from wood, vase, and ivory, and even one made from cast blue glass.